Okay, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be here. My name's Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm the Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance. Oh, where is my slide? Sorry. The Research Data Alliance is a community of over 11,500 data experts from around the globe who collaborate together in building the social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and the reuse of data. US, RDA US is recognized region of the Research Data Alliance, and it represents 2,500 members that support the global operations and help strengthen the data science infrastructure community. Excuse me. If you're not already a member of RDA, we would encourage you to join. And I think the link is a little bit hidden on the slide, and apologize for that. Okay, today I'm going to go over just a couple of little housekeeping items, and then we'll get going on the webinar. So before we get started, I want to bring to your attention that we are recording this presentation, and I will be adding that recording to the website, the RDA webinar website. There will be a link there to the recording. I will also be uploading the slides to that same website following the event. Each presenter will be leaving time at the end of their talk for questions. So it's going to be a tight day. So I really appreciate if you would use the Q&A button on your Zoom control panel, and it's down on the bottom. You can put it in chat, but we would prefer you use Q&A. If there's not enough time at the end of each talk for the questions, go ahead and still add the questions to the Q&A, but direct it to the presenter that you want. And if we have time, we'll do some at the end. If not, I will put it all on a Google Doc. I'll get the presenters to answer it, and I will send it to you after the event. So today's webinar is hosted by the RDA US, and it's the fourth in the webinar series highlighting RDA group recommendations and outputs. Today we'll be hearing from the RDA Libraries for Research Data Interest Group, and it is L4RD is the acronym for that. So you're going to hear me talking about that throughout. The L4RD interest group was chartered in 2014, making it one of the longest running interest groups of the RDA. This particular interest group often serves as a forum for projects, initiatives around data in libraries, and some of these projects and initiatives turn into wider group activities, such as the three that will be presented today. Before we get started, though, we are interested in gathering some of your input and some of your ideas in preparation for the last presentation of the day. We will be exploring what this interest group might focus on moving forward. We'd really appreciate and welcome your thoughts on this topic, especially areas or topics that are of interest to you and that would be useful for you for this group to discuss. And Suni has created a Google Doc and to track your ideas. And Suni, if you could put that into the chat for us, you'll find that link in the chat. Thanks, Suni. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce this wonderful group of presenters. Our first presenter is Mijke Jetten, Community Manager, Data Stewardship at the Dutch Tech Center for Life Sciences and Health RI in the Netherlands. She will be presenting the 23 Things Libraries for Research Data. Our second presenter is Connie Clare, Community Manager from 4TU Research Data in the United Kingdom, and she'll be presenting Engaging Researchers with Data Management, the Cookbook. Our third presenter is Chris Erdman, Assistant Director for Data Stewardship, Data Leadership at the American Geophysical Union in the United States, and he'll be presenting on the top 10 fair data and software things. Our fourth presenter is Suni Go, Deputy Director at Nanyang Technical University Library in Singapore. She will introduce the L4RD interest group's newly elected co-chairs, and we'll be discussing the new initiatives and the items that you're going to be putting on the spreadsheet. So with that, I will turn it over to Mijke to present. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Stephanie. So let me share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for this opportunity to present to you the RDA 22 Things adoption. So what we did in the Netherlands, but I think we did something that is relevant for the full, global community. We adopted, updated the original 22 things built by this interest group. And I'm going to present it today. I'm from indeed the Dutch Tech Center for Life Sciences and RDA, both Dutch initiatives, but I'm also presenting on behalf of the full LCRDM task group. So that LCRDM is our national coordination point research data management in the Netherlands. And this was a project of this national coordination point. And Connie will post the link to both this presentation and to the tool that I'm going to present today. So I hope you recognize on the left the original 23 things. These were drafted for libraries, for librarians to help with research data management. And what we did was via an RDA adoption grant, we got the opportunity sponsored by the RDA to adjust the 23 things to more than only the library audience. And also we got the opportunity to update it for the Dutch context, but I think the updates that we made are relevant for the full global context. So there's pretty, not that much Dutch about it, but yeah, it's just a great update of the original 23 resources. And what we found really relevant, that it helped us to create a common understanding among diverse practitioners and supporters with regard to RDM. So this was really a community effort. And if you follow the link to the slides, you can also find the link to all the output as we've put everything on Zenodo to make it available to the full community. And below you can also see both the link to the webpage with all the information about this project and also the link to the original 23 things library for research data product. So what we did, we first started with creating a nationwide commitment. So this really is a Dutch national effort. And then we started adjusting the 23 things in various sprint sessions with the diverse audiences that I'm going to present later to you. Our next step was getting the 23 things adopted within the Netherlands as well among those different communities. And that was actually a little bit harder, and we're still in that process. And of course, there is the dissemination phase, and that means including everything on the Zenodo community that I just introduced to you. So this is two different outputs. So on the left, you see the output that were newly created PDF versions of the original 23 things. So the original 23 things had really nice topics and relevant information for librarians. And what we did, we adjusted these 23 things to the different audiences. So for researchers, for students, we updated the librarian variant. We created one for data stewards, for IT staff, for research software engineers, and for policymakers. So if you go to the link, you can find the digital sheets. You can use them for training purposes, and they're easy, easy downloadable via Zenodo, and you can print them, you can digitally share them on your website. So this is a really nice update of the 23 things. And these include all different tips with regard to, for instance, data management planning, data privacy, data ethics, data sharing, licensing. So all the elements of the data lifecycle will recognize in those digital sheets. Then what we also did was adding the content. I think in total, there are over 250 tips and tricks. We added them to a digital tool, the 23 things tool. It's still in beta version, so it's work in progress, but you can filter by audience, by theme, or by data lifecycle. And depending on the audience you are, so either researcher, student, librarian, data steward, IT staff, software engineer, or policymaker, you get the tips that are really useful for you. So we did that on purpose because we wanted to make sure that if you download these really nice digital sheets, they probably become quite fast outdated. So to solve that issue, we're trying to develop a maintenance plan and a training plan. So the maintenance plan involves expanding the involved community, so not only the librarians, but the bigger community. We have an editorial board. We have regular maintenance of the tool, and ideally we're in the process of getting it formally adopted as a RDA output. And then we also wanted to add training, a training plan to the tool. So this includes ready-to-use training packages or modules that build on the 23 Things tool that you can add to existing RDM courses. For instance, the essentials for data support training that we have on RDM in the Netherlands. So let me introduce a small user story to you. So here we have Boris. Boris is a data steward at TU Eindhoven, and a PhD candidate asked him how she could cite coding as software that she received from her professor when doing her analysis. So Boris could use the 23 Things tool himself to find the answers, and that way he's kind of training himself. Boris could also directly suggest a PhD candidate to go to the 23 Things tool, and in that way creating and building RDM and FAIR awareness. And the best story is that the PhD candidate would also go to her professor and hint that this is a really fantastic tool, and he as a senior should know about research data management and should check the tool himself. So if you go to the tool, you start with selecting the audience. So that is what Boris does. Boris is advising a researcher or PhD candidate. So he ticks the box researchers and PhD candidates. Then he chooses his topic. So that is about software citation, because that was the question of the PhD candidate. And then the result is two nicely collected resources on data and software citation. And one of those things leads Boris and the PhD candidate, and in the end also the professor, to a really nice resource on the FAIR software route, enabling citation of software. And this includes a Help Me Choose button that allows the PhD candidate to decide on which legal background checklist he or she should decide on use in the PhD research. So this is just an example of Boris and the PhD candidate and her professor using the tool. And the tool allows you also to design your own learning path. So I'm shouting out to you, please use, we'll have a look at the tool, check your audience, check your team, check your data lifecycle phase, and the tool will give you many hits to help you or the PhD researcher or the professor you are working for. So there was just a quick overview. If you have any questions or if you have any remarks or suggestions or additions to the tool, because we really love to add more tips and tricks to this tool. We're already over 250 tips and tricks to produce many more resources. Please contact our editorial team at info@lcrdm.nl and work with us in improving this RDA tool. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mijke. So as I mentioned, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A. There's a question for you, Mijke. It looks like it's in the chat.
Yeah, I might answer that directly. So Irina, you're pointing at the training materials. So we're still working on the training materials. That is actually the difficult part. We wanted to include that, but of course, COVID-19 complicated things a little bit. So we wanted to include the tool in the actual trainings that we have. So we're currently building on that. So that is also the part that we need to update on the website. But indeed, in the end, we will use really nice to have training packages or modules that you could easily include it in your own training. But please be a little bit patient for that part because we're still working on that.
Let's see, I don't see anything, any other questions. Okay, Thank you so much, Mijke. Next up is Connie. So if you can stop sharing your...
Stephanie, there's a question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to read that off for Mijke?
It's from Matthew Cannon. He's saying, great tool. Can you tell which elements have been accessed, used most to date?
That's a very good question, Matthew. That is about the numbers. To be honest, I have no clue. So I'll need to check that with you, and we'll get back to this group and inform you about that. But because I indeed think that could say something about the issues that are most difficult, most challenging, most advice is requested on. So that's a really good question.
And I see another one. A lot of, since this is a presentation on, as I take it, a specific aspect of data librarianship, how, in your opinion, should librarians prepare themselves for the job?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Arjun. So I think printing the 23 things, the digital sheets that we created, is already a really good start. So you could either make it available on the website or use it in training, or I don't know, print it on a postcard and send it around in your organization. I think those 23 tips, because that was the original output from this interest group, was also meant for those 23 tips for the different audiences, are already a really good start of training yourself.
And then the last is a comment. I like how you have a maintenance plan.
Yeah, it's not that easy though. Drafting a maintenance plan and keeping the editorial board alive and making sure that people give input is the difficult part. But indeed, that was part of the RDA adoption grant. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mijke. If you could stop sharing your screen now, then Connie's up.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'll just share my screen. So everybody should be able to see my slides. So welcome everybody, good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending where you're dialing in from. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about engaging researchers with data management, the cookbook. So as Stephanie said, this was also an output of the RDA Libraries for Research Data Interest Group. My name's Connie Clare and I'm the community manager for 4TU Research Data, which is an international data repository. But I was also fortunate to be part of this excellent team of people that managed to create this resource, which is the cookbook. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be giving you a bit of an overview about what the cookbook is, how the project was organised, the kind of timeline that it took to put this together, how we drafted the cookbook during a book sprint, and then a bit about how the cookbook should be used with some of the case study examples towards the end. So the cookbook was published by Open Book Publishers and it's available using the link that I think Mike is going to put in the chat. You can download it as a PDF form, you can view it by HTML, or you can also purchase a paper or a hardback copy. And the idea is that it brings together 24 innovative case studies from institutions all around the world that show different activities for how to effectively engage researchers with data management. So the idea is that this cookbook is really for anybody that's interested in research data management. The idea is to raise awareness of some of the activities and the best practices, but also to inform and inspire other institutions to implement some of these activities. So the project was organised and it was originally called Engaging Researchers with Research Data, What Works? And the project was led by Marta Teperek, who is now the head of research data services at TU Delft, and she's also the director of 4TU Research Data. But the project actually comprised around about 50 members or so, depending on what capacity you're looking at. But the key members, we had a steering board of 10 people. We also had task leaders, of which we had 6 people that were working on various different aspects of the project. And then we had 8 authors and editors that came together to actually co-create the book. And it's really impressive when we look at the project timeline, because we actually from start to finish managed to create the cookbook in around about a year. So I wasn't part of the project when it was actually started. So the project was outlined during International Data Week, which was part of the 12th plenary meeting in Botswana back in November 2018. And then the following few months in December to March, this was when a survey was drafted to collect information about various different case study activities. And the survey was circulated around 60 funders, 80 institutions, and 28 mailing lists. And from that, we received 216 responses from 50 unique institutions, and they detailed 88 different activities. So then over the summer of 2019, the next job was to really analyze those different case studies, perform some kind of quantitative data analysis, categorize those different activities, and then with the help of the steering board, select those case studies and then interview the contributors so we could get a really full story for each of those. And then this is where I was involved. So in July 2019, we undertook a 3-day book sprint to then draft those chapters of the cookbook. And then it was open for peer review, editing, and it was published and then promoted at the 14th plenary meeting in Helsinki in October 2019. So a jam-packed schedule and really well organised by Marta and the rest of the team. So for those of you that don't know what a book sprint is, this is a collaborative writing exercise that takes place typically in less than a week. So you can see us here working on the book. And this was, as I said, a 3-day sprint, and it was undertaken in a hotel in Den Haag in the Netherlands. And this was where we each had case studies that were assigned to us as authors that we had to draft. So 7 of us were there in the hotel, and then we had a remote editor, James Savage, who was in New Zealand, and he would then edit the content overnight. And if you're interested in knowing more about our book sprint experience, you can read this blog article, Book Sprint Success, a team writing exercise for the win. And if you're also interested in doing this kind of collaborative exercise, we would say that the tips are to set out the goals clearly at the very start, come prepared with content. So in our case, this was interview transcripts, photos and other materials, and also schedule blocks of writing, time to brief the rest of the group, and also take breaks, go outside, have coffee, have drinks, and of course, importantly, have fun. So how to use the cookbook. The idea is that the cookbook is something you can navigate and cherry pick those case studies that are of most interest and relevance to you and your institution. So just like a traditional cookbook, which has recipes with a list of ingredients, we actually had this infographic here for every single case study. So you can navigate the case study and then choose your particular activity based on the number of researchers and PhDs involved, the number of RDM support staff, as well as the target audience. So does it appeal to first stage or leading researchers? Is the main driver of the activity a top-down or a bottom-up approach, for example? And then how easy it is to implement with regards to cost, what materials are required, infrastructure, and also time. So just to show you an overview of the cookbook chapters. So the first chapter we have is on research data management policy, the holy grail of research data management support. So this is like how to have RDM accepted within an institution. We also have a chapter on finding triggers for engagement. So this is like adapting existing policies and workflows that you have to try and engage researchers. Also a chapter on engagement through training, dedicated events to gauge interest and build networks. And we also had a chapter on networks of data champions. So these are volunteers who advocate for good research data management practice and open science within institutions. We also have a chapter on dedicated consultants to offer one-to-one support with data. So this is more about different data stewardship models. And then finally, interviews and case studies for reward and recognition, and then engaging with senior researchers through archiving. So the final few slides, I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the case studies that we showcase in the cookbook. So this is an example that's from chapter 2, and this is seeking opportunities for engagement and adapting existing workflows. So this particular case study is called Taking Advantage of Existing Administrative Systems, and it was from the Medical Research Council, Social and Public Health Sciences Unit from the University of Glasgow. And this was contributed by Mary Kate Hanna, who's a data scientist. And this case study shows the workflow of what researchers have to do within this unit. So if a researcher applies for a grant, they then complete an online form to detail that grant proposal. This is then sent to a portfolio group, which is a group of researchers, and they check that the topic is within the unit's remit, they approve it, They then identify the resources that the researcher is going to need. So do they need help from personnel, data storage solutions? Maybe they need to complete a DMP, so they need to use DMP Online as a tool. And then an automatic email was sent to Mary Kate. Mary Kate then follows up by contacting that researcher, sending them a presentation about research data management, and then following up by sending them this trial master file, which contains information about their grant application, any legal documents, and any other research data management files, folders, and information that they need. The second case study example is about engagement through training. So this chapter details different low-cost training methods to support researchers. This is a really nice researcher-led bottom-up initiative, bring your own data workshop. So this was set up by a researcher and data champion at the University of Cambridge, Anne-Marie Hildegard ex-Shepherd. And she realized as a researcher herself that research data management and open science really starts with good file and folder management and organization from the very start of a project. So she took the initiative to create this official calendar event, which was a monthly 2-hour informal workshop where researchers within her department would come together and share best practices for file naming conventions, how to write a README, so a description about the data, how it was collected, and then how to structure the file and folders so it's easy to find in the future. So this is a really nice example of peer-to-peer networking and collaboration. And the final case study I'm going to share is interviews and case studies. So this is to increase the visibility of research data services and management teams. And this particular case study was contributed by 2 data supporters from Vrije University in Amsterdam and Utrecht University, so from Annemiek van der Kuil and Anneke de Maat. And this particular case study is called Showcasing Peers and Their Good Practice. So what they are talking about is interviewing researchers and then publishing their stories online on the website, for example. And this helps to illustrate the value of research data management best practices. So this is all about highlighting those that lead by example, giving the researchers impact and visibility, and raising their professional profile, whether they be an early career researcher or a senior researcher. And what's really interesting is that they say that this is peer-driven examples that can influence others. So social norms govern the behaviour of society members. So in effect, researchers actually take heed of the practices of other researchers rather than listening to top-down policy. And they also say that sharing these stories helps researchers to really know where to seek help and get support. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the case studies in the cookbook. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I will open the floor to questions. I'll just stop sharing. Do we have questions?
Perfect timing, right on the bell, Connie. Yeah, any questions? Thank you so much. Put it in the Q&A or in chat.
Oh,
there is a question. There is a question for Connie. Are there any professional visit programs for international library professionals to the University of Utrecht libraries where they can get involved and fortify themselves with an exposure to RDM and its importance to libraries?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether there are. I'm not that I've heard of any. Are there any professional visit programs for international library? So I know that, for example, there are certain fellowship programs within different organizations. So I don't know if that's what this question is actually relating to. So for example, I know 40 Research Data is launching a fellowship program where we'll be recruiting and embedding fellows from around the world to come and work on fair data practices, but I'm not sure whether that really answers the question. I'm not sure about the University of Utrecht libraries. So I don't know if anybody else here also knows about that. I see there's a question also from Arjun. Are there any upskilling sessions at regular intervals for faculty and doctoral scholars by library professionals on how to frame DMPs? I'm just trying to think if I know of any. I'm not sure I can answer that question either.
There are some through the Research Data Management Clearinghouse in ESIP. So there are, if you go there, there are some professional materials. Yeah. I'll include that link.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone else has can help with the answers, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll grab that as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Connie. Okay, so next up is Chris Erdman with AGU, and you can, I think Connie already stopped sharing.
I'll try to share that link later. In the meantime, I'll share my slides.
I'll see if I can find it. It's the
the
database.
Research Data Management Clearinghouse. So,
okay.
Yeah, but I'll share my slides right now. So welcome everyone. Actually, I'm sharing my search right now. So that link allows you to comment if you wanted to leave any messages on the slides too. So not share, present. Welcome everyone. It's nice to see all of you, the attendance here. So I'm Chris Erdman with the AGU. Previously, I was with the Library Carpentry as the director on this particular project. But it wasn't just me, it was a lot of other people, 80 plus people that contributed to this top 10 fair data and software things. And actually some of them are on this call. So thank you all that are out there. So just a little bit of background on the top 10 fair things. So really, I think the beginnings of this started with the Carpentries and some of the conversations that were happening there at the Carpentry Con meeting that happened in Dublin. There was a session on trying to understand FAIR at the discipline level. And so that sort of kicked things off in some ways. And then some of the people that were presenting there actually ran a workshop, a really great workshop. I wish, there were more of at TIB Hanover, where they paired FAIR and the Carpentries material. The interesting thing there is I could actually double as an attendee and a trainer, and I actually got to listen to all the attendees' feedback, and they were all there for FAIR. So I realized that this was a really critical thing that I think was coming through. And then of course the Research Data Alliance, you heard earlier from Mijke about the 23 things that was an inspiration, as well as the ARDC. So in Australia, they were also doing the 23 things, and they were even moving it to 10 things, which I think was our inspiration. And Natasha Simons there at ARDC, and I guess you can also say the 10 simple rules, and there are other cases out there where people do the 10 things, 10 like things. So I won't necessarily go on the background of how we set up the sprint. There's a lot of blog posts on the Library Carpentry website. If you search for FAIR, you'll find all that materials are covering information about how the sprints were run, how we conducted them. But I think I'll move to the findings, I think, which are interesting, which is that I found a lot of people that came to the top 10 fair things were not Carpentry's instructors yet. They had heard about it, and there was a little bit of maybe intimidation there, like, how do I get involved with the Carpentries? And a lot of them, I think, well, a good many actually started entering the Carpentries right around this time, and getting familiar with it through the sprints. So in some ways, it made the barriers to entry lighter and more inclusive. The other thing is understanding FAIR in the context of local communities teams was helpful. So the teams that got together to work on these things actually helped them understand, what FAIR meant as far as how they were going to communicate to their own local communities. And there were examples in the Netherlands, but also in NIH, there was a team working on trying to understand this at their level, and also in Australia at some research organizations. So there were places around the world, And then planning ahead, streamlining your instructions, structuring the sprint, learning after the fact of how you can structure it, because you really, if you open the doors, like people can write on a lot of things. And then underestimating the time it takes to edit the material following the sprints. It takes a good amount of time and to edit the material because we'll end up with a lot of outline material and a lot of sort of half finished material. The top pair things is still active. It's on GitHub. You can create an issue, pull requests. What happens there is that people often say, I'd like to do this at the discipline level. And they do that also with the carpentry's fair lesson, which I'll cover later. But yeah, that really is like what they often talk about on these side conversations or in GitHub. And the experience from the sprint was it helped other sprints. So what the lessons we learned have at least in some cases I've spoken to other groups. Like so recently there was a fair handbook sprint, and I spoke with that group initially about how to run their sprint. So I mentioned again, this is a living resource. It lives on GitHub. It's a hosted site with releases to Zenodo. So there's 2 releases that you can cite on Zenodo, but you can also contribute still through that link on GitHub. And it's all CC BY and just freely available except for the sort of attribution side of things. So here's an example of just one of the things. So research software things, and this is again we had 10 things for each particular topic or discipline. So this is thing 9 about sort of delving into how can users sort of properly cite their work, and it mentions at this point sort of reading the citation file format, reading up on that to become familiar with it. So take this all with a grain of salt, but I ran some numbers. It actually brought up a question in general of how do we assess our fair training material? We're all of us, I'm sure a lot of us are putting out this fair training material, and it's not exactly like citing a paper. How do we assess this as a community? And we started tackling that in various groups, but I started looking at some of the metrics here. I guess I could delve into the Google Analytics, but I used a tool that looked at search engine optimization traffic for the Fair Things website, and it gets about 9,000 views a month. So in comparison, if you compare that to other sites like Fair Sharing, it's about 3 times as much traffic as Fair Sharing, or the Research Data Management Clearinghouse, it's about 5 times as much. And I looked at How to Fair, a Danish resource, and really it's on another level of magnitude with regards to that. So it really gets a lot of traffic. And I didn't check other things like the Research Data Management tools stuff that was mentioned earlier. Would be nice to look at. But yeah, it is, generally speaking, this all depends on your context and what actually search engine tool you use. But I used Google search here, and if you search for fair data and software, you will end up with the resource as one of the top 10 hits. And I guess the other thing that we did was structured it right, because Google creates a snippet for people to see what's inside the website before they actually get there. So these are just a taste of things, to look at there and take them with a grain of salt. But another thing that's interesting is, within the 900 results on Google for the Fair Things, we really had all these sites, these organizations pointing to the Fair Things from various locations. So obviously that helps with search engine optimization when people across the world link to a resource. And that in general, that says that's an important point to highlight here, is that when we do things as a community, when we do them together and contribute together, that actually helps with the messaging and really helping with our resources being found, it appears. And I mentioned that we released the things to Zenodo, or released them for a citation. So 80 plus authors, 50 plus institutions. I mentioned this was a really collaborative effort. One of the interesting things here is that it's gotten 6,000 plus views and 3,000 plus downloads. It is within the top 10 FAIR resources if you search for most viewed resources on Zenodo. It comes up pretty high. So there's that. That's sort of that alternative mode of assessment, I guess you can say, or metrics. And then the Google Scholar side of things, it does come up at least 29 times. And again, take this with a grain of salt. This was just me trying to figure out the impact of the FAIR things. And it comes up at 29 results. These are the sort of, I pulled out the 3 resources that used it. So fairness, literacy, and the FAIR principles, interpretations, and implementation considerations, and then also the towards FAIR principles for research software. So it did have some impact, I guess, in the literature. So there's that as well. And then it had sort of these additional impact with like creating posters, and this was one. I don't know why they put me as the first author. I actually was done by the others on the author list, really that created this really nice poster that I think was visually captivating, and could be something you put around for your researchers to look at. So also another thing to look at is Twitter mentions here. There were 102 tweets total. These are additional sites sources in addition to the ones you saw earlier. And then the top 10 FAIR hashtag is actually another one that we used. So it got a little bit more tweets. This is just top 10 FAIR, searching for that with 102 tweets, at least that I can find. And then top 10 FAIR got sort of an additional sites here, like the eScience Center you see there. So yeah, this ended up as an outcome, output and recommendation for Research Data Alliance. Got some feedback, and then we posted it. And so that's a resource for the community to take advantage of. And sort of these are the 10 things in each of the disciplines that people worked on. Can be sort of those quick dives into what FAIR means at that level. Highlighted outcomes, this did feed into carpentry's library carpentry FAIR data and software lesson, which is still in beta or pre-alpha, as you can see. It's still in the works, and someday hopefully it will be finished. It's sort of half complete, but it would be great to finish that. And then recently there was this FAIR Bites, which sort of takes from that too, saying that FAIR is evolving, our work on FAIR is evolving, and really we can sort of take this applied approach and hear about how FAIR is being applied in particular things like electronic notebooks. So that sort of had that sort of crossover impact as well on that initiative, which you heard at the Go FAIR festival recently. And then Bank of Canada asked for a FAIR and carpentry's lesson, two-day course, which I was involved with some other carpentry's instructors. And when I was the library carpentry director, the feedback I got from that session was invaluable. It turned out that was one of the workshops that really made connections with people that attended, with really understanding what they were learning in carpentry, is how it could be applied, why was it important. That was the feedback I received, that oftentimes we struggled with in workshops, of understanding really what does this mean to my work. And then the Force 11 Scholarly Communications Institute is where we often point to the top 10 FAIR, because we get those questions of what does FAIR mean at the discipline level. So in closing, just some ideas here, thinking about the top 10 fair, sort of a retrospective is, hearing at the Go Fair Festival recently, we talked a lot about the importance of convergence and messaging, seeing a lot of people talking about FAIR on the web or at webinars all over the place. And there was this push for sort of convergence and trying to get our messaging, more succinct. And then at AGU, at least with my colleague Shelley Stahl, we are starting to use more of this checklist approach, to guiding authors. So most recent example is this Jupyter guidance that I linked to here, that really takes that sort of direct approach of here are the 5 things you need to know when you're trying to make your, archive your notebooks, make them runnable and cite them. And so top 10 fair data and software things seems to have this SEO, this search engine optimization advantage, and takes the checklist type approach. I think, takes that sort of top 10 things that you need to know, which I think, oftentimes I hear researchers just need to know directly what they need to do. The messaging needs to be more succinct. And then this last point is, well, consider leveraging the top 10 fair data and software things for convergence on messaging. This is a community resource. Maybe we should, look at how do we take all the work that was done initially with the disciplines and the topics and think about what we can do as sort of a more general approach of like, here are the top things you need to know generally as a researcher, and maybe there can be improvements at the discipline level. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. Questions, feedback?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. If you have questions for Chris, put it in the Q&A and put @Chris, and we'll try to answer them at the end. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Suni now because we only have 10 minutes, a little like 12 minutes left for the whole webinar. And hopefully you guys filled out the form that she posted in there earlier. And Chris will grab your questions and see if we have enough time at the end. If we don't, like I said at the beginning, we will put it on a spreadsheet and I'll ask Chris to answer those and we'll send it to everyone. But we've run out of time for that. Sorry, just on such a tight schedule today. So with that, Suni, thank you. And
Yeah.
looking forward to hearing your talk.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to see my screen with the Google Doc?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah. So I would now like to perhaps start with briefly introducing the new co-chairs. I'm Suni. I'm from Singapore. Very happy to see all of you today. So maybe before we go into the discussion about the next things for this interest group, maybe I'll just briefly introduce the new co-chairs. Together with me, we have Mr. Naresh Kumar. I think Naresh is with us today. Yeah, I can see his name in the participants list. So hello to Naresh. In addition, we have Stanislaus Agava. Yeah, so together we hope to learn from this group and to be part of all these wonderful sharing sessions. So without further ado, I would like to bring your attention to this Google Doc that we have put together. So Chris and I were having a discussion about it would be wonderful to engage this group today to hear from you what could be the next things you would like this interest group to work on. What topics would be useful to you and your communities? It would be great if you can put in some ideas here and we can put in our votes for those that we think that, we would like to see some of these activities surrounding these topics for the next few months. Yeah. While you brainstorm on the ideas for the topics, there is an upcoming RDA virtual plenary end of the year. So it's going to be 3rd to 18th of November. So that could be a time when together as a group, we might want to identify potential sharing sessions or topics that we want to get more inputs from the international group. So it would be great if you can start putting in some ideas, and it will be useful if you can put in your name and contact so that we can also follow up with you. Chris, would you like to add on?
Yeah, we're really looking for, I guess, maybe you said this already, Sunny, but maybe I'll say it again, that at least for our next interest group meeting, so we're really looking for it to be community driven. So if you have any ideas, you know, on because we're often, I think, in our cycles with RDA, we're kind of scrambling to find topics, and it would be much better to have it sort of community driven with the ideas that Suni is asking for here. So please do add them in here. This will help with guiding the next you know, session, and put your name, your contact information next to it, because we might tap you. So is that helpful, Sini? I don't know if
yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And I think you might have taken questions too, right? From besides the document, I think you were gonna also take ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chris, what are some of the things that the group's working on now in SUNY? Is there anything in the pipeline right now that's in discussions?
Yeah, and by the way, Stephanie, if anyone has their hand up, use the hand up tool in Zoom. Let's you know, let them ask their question or present here. But yeah, I can only speak to the last two, which were fair related. So it was projects, initiatives in the community around fair, and then we did this interdisciplinary research session around, you know, sort of what do you do when you have all this cross disciplines working together. You know, like there's no particular repository that they might use. They're using different standards, and so that was pretty interesting to hear. You know, from the libraries working on those sort of grant funded projects, those projects, how they tackle that. So, but yeah, we already do have some suggestion here, which is great. I don't know if Suni, you want to comment on some of the suggestions there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm also looking at for in the direction of our panelists. So for the presentations that you have shared with us today, would you like to also have follow-up activities for this group?
Connie? Go to Connie first.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Suni?
Yeah, so thanks very much for your sharing today. So I'm just wondering what kind of follow-up activities could potentially be supportive of, you know, furthering the wonderful work that you have done.
So following on from the cookbook, we now have the Engaging Researchers with Data Management Interest Group. And I know some of the discussions we've had following on from the cookbook has been to make some of those case studies more accessible in different formats. So in podcasts, other different media, and also how those kinds of activities now translate to a virtual setting, because obviously now a lot of those things can't be done in person. So with regards to that, there are some ideas, and also trying to make things available in different languages, also supporting low income or developing countries with some of these activities that maybe don't have some of the human and technical infrastructure.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to take a look at some of the suggestions here. By Muhammad Ikhwan Ismail from University Sains Malaysia. The way to start RDM services by the library, top-down approach and capacity building of the librarian on RDM. The next one is by Joy McNally from Union of Concerned Scientists. The topic suggested here is building a sustainable RDM approach for nonprofits or organizations with solo librarians or data managers. Yeah. So Chris, have we had any similar topics in the past?
No, these are great topics. Yeah, I think these both present two challenges. I think, the sustainability side, where we just kind of we are wearing multiple hats and really trying to, like there's some level of exhaustion here of how you sort of keep up with doing RDM research data services, and so the sustainability side Joy mentions is really, and I know I remember Joy. Hi, Joy. When I was in Boston, and then the other one too, this top down versus the bottom up is really interesting, and would be another great topic of getting sort of the vantage points from both sides.
So thanks very much, Muhammad Ikhwan Ismail and Joy McNally for your suggestions. We'll leave the Google Doc open so that anyone who might have an idea or you have that moment when you want to put in a topic here, the Google Doc is open for you to fill it up. And if you like to cast your votes, just add 1 to the last column. Yeah. So I guess I will have to hand it back to Stephanie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Suni. Could you stop sharing your screen and I'll get my last slide up. Do you see my screen? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for the speakers, Suni, Chris, Connie, Mijke, for a very informative presentation. And Megan, thank you for your technical help. As mentioned earlier, this webinar slide deck will be available on the RDA website. If you're not already, I'll reiterate, a member of RDA. It's a very vibrant community. I encourage you to join. The web address is on the screen, if you can see my screen. And I want to, on behalf of the RDA and the RDA US and all the presenters, thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Best wishes. Stay healthy. Bye.